and then we'd sing sounds.
It's transgressive. What are you guys doing? That's amazing. I'll have to tell her. I'm sure she'll remember that.
Tony and Susan were long time friends.
And so
I knew him before in fact, when we started graduate school.
Really?
We were at different places together.
Yeah.
We had Danforth fellowships,
Okay.
which required you to say you had a religious conviction, which is easy to do. All right, you go to all three of those youth fellowship meetings. Second, that you would get your doctorate and teach that course at college level. Okay, that's what I wanted to do. Third, you had to go to summer camp on the shores of Lake Michigan called Minnewanka, Camp Minnewanka. And Tony was captain, this is true, was captain of the softball team called the Yankees. And I was captain of, the Rebels. Wow.
And you taught chemistry here for
12 years.
12 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Before doing that other thing.
Turned for lust for power in my heart, right, as Jimmy Carter would say.
That's right.
His dear mother was a high school buddy of mine.
Wow. Yeah.
In Winnsboro, South Carolina.
Small world. Yeah.
Did I know her husband?
My dad was from Dallas, Texas, and they met in New York because she went to New York to sing, and that they met on tour with New York City Opera. So, should we get going?
Yep, we're we sang together. Sam's.
It was a pleasure to meet you.
Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to our celebration of the Abbott Honors in English program. I'm Randy Ingram, the current chair of the English department. And more important for tonight, I'm the coordinator of the Abbott Honors in English program. That role comes with a number of privileges. Tonight, one of those privileges is introducing our guest of honor, Jack Livings. First, though, I want to introduce some members of this audience to one another. Seniors in the Abbott Honors in English program, would you please raise your hands? They look a little... They may look a little tired and confused because the first drafts of their theses were due yesterday.
Yeah.
So tonight we will congratulate them and we will not use the word revision. Seniors, I hope that you will get the chance, as some of you already have, to meet Professor Emeritus of English Gil Holland and Siri Holland in the back there. Both of them models of adventurous, lifelong learning in the best liberal arts tradition. I hope that you'll also get to meet Susan Abbott in the front here, whose name appears at the front of our honors program. As we prepared for tonight's event, Susan called me with perfect advice, and she asked for copies of Jack's books. She read them, Jack, and she's still here. The ways that she got us and got herself ready for tonight is a fine example of the hospitality and the intellectual engagement that Susan Abbott has brought to Davidson since her arrival in 1964. On this occasion, we think of Susan's husband, Tony Abbott. You seniors and everyone who studies English at Davidson College has encountered Tony's influence because Tony helped to hire much, maybe most, of the current English department. Colleagues in English, I will not ask you to raise your hands, but many of us remember being interviewed by Tony. We remember his generosity and his curiosity about our work. Tonight, you seniors would have likewise been the focus of that generosity and curiosity. He would have asked lots of questions about your projects. It would have been a treat to watch you explain, for instance, the various websites for fan fiction. Tony seemed to relish how what we call English changes with each generation. He helped to hire English professors whose work was something new and often surprising to him. He would have been delighted by the surprises of your projects. Tony and Susan's support of the honors program in English nurtures the young scholars and artists of the present and of the future without trying to predict or prescribe their passions. Tonight, we thank them for this expression of faith. And we thank Jack Livings for returning to Davidson to join our celebration. Jack Livings is a 1996 graduate of Davidson College, where he was a Bonner Scholar, an English major, and a Marine Bell Prize winner. He earned his MFA from Iowa Writers Workshop. Jack has been named a Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford and a Rome Prize Fellow at the American Academy in Rome. Jack's short fiction has appeared in The Public Space, The Paris Review, Tin House, and Story Quarterly. His stories have been anthologized in Best American Short Stories and 2 Pushcart Prize volumes. His interviews have appeared in the Paris Review. His nonfiction and criticism have appeared in the Nabokov Studies, Newsweek, and the San Francisco Chronicle. Jack is the author of 2 books. His story collection, The Dog, was published in 2014 by Farrar, Straus, and Jerome. It was named to Best Books of the Year list by the New York Times and the Times Literary Supplement. It was a Barnes & Noble Discover New Writers selection. It was longlisted for the Franco Condor International Short Story Award, and it was awarded the Penn Robert Bingham Prize for debut fiction. His novel, The Blizzard Party, published in 2021 by FSG, was named the Best Book of the Year by Kirkus Reviews, which called Jack's novel an exuberant everything and the kitchen sink pleasure. Jack lives in New York City. He is married to the writer and editor, Jenny Yabrov. He is the proud father of 3 children. He currently teaches fiction writing through Stanford's Continuing Studies program. To close with a reflection on teaching, I wonder whether my colleagues who worked with Jack in Chambers classrooms could have predicted with any precision his success as a writer. They may have believed that he would have accomplished great things, that vague direct object, great things. But perhaps no one could imagine this seriously great thing until Jack himself did. I should say that I drafted several lovely paragraphs of fandom about how and why I so admire The Blizzard Party. But seniors, sometimes even lovely paragraphs need to be cut, especially when there's more important material to come. So in the spirit of professors who have faith in their students, and in the spirit of former students who leave classrooms to write their own unforeseeable stories, welcome back to Davidson.
Thank you. Wow, thanks, Randy. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Zoran Kuzmanovic, the English department. Thank you, Susan, and congratulations to the Abbott honors.
Can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me? I'm going to bring this up a little bit. Is that better? That's why I want you in the back row. I told him he couldn't sit down front. No, I'm kidding. This is drifting a little bit. I don't know if I actually want anybody to answer the question that you posed about what my previous professors would have thought I was up to. I don't think it would have had success anywhere in it. But there are people in this room who I'm just going to go with it. I got it? Good. Yeah, I left my roadie in New York. He's okay. I was saying there are professors in this room who I might go without this. Is that okay? Is that okay? Influenced me in ways that and I'm not exaggerating, I think about them and discussions that we had and books that we read and arguments that we had on a weekly basis. What you are doing now as students will stay with you. And it will influence the work that you do, even if it has nothing to do with writing, if it has nothing to do with English. This is a special place, you know, you hear that a lot if you're here for 4 years, and it is because you get to work with brilliant people one-on-one, and they will stay in touch with you after you've, which is mind-staggering. just briefly, Tony Abbott was my professor too, and I was told before I got to Davidson my freshman year that I had to take a class with him. And so I did. It was the first class I walked into at Davidson. It was modern drama. And it completely shifted the way I looked at the world. He put Pirandello, Brecht, Chekhov in front of us. Yeah?
I'm turning it on.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know why this. And
Can the mic come up? Do you want to freestyle it?
oh man, you really don't want me to do that. Try it like that, maybe.
Can't hear you, Jack.
I'm sorry. Now? Better now? Okay. We'll try it like this. And what he gave me specifically was George Bernard Shaw. I spent weeks after we studied Shaw in the basement at Little reading his sermons, his essays, and reorienting myself. I knew how I felt about my spirituality, but I didn't have words for it, and Shaw gave me that. And that was one of Tony's main subjects, was Christianity and spirituality, and Shaw himself. I also had him for creative writing, and I will not say much about that except that he tolerated me in his classes. I thought I was really good. I really wasn't. So what I'm going to read is a short story that I published last year in the Paris Review. And the narrator is a playwright, which I thought had some correspondence to the work that I did with Tony a long time ago. This is called River Crossing. My wife, my daughter, and I live on the bluff overlooking the river. The river is wide, and it is swarming with crocodiles and hippos. Courtesy of our unique ecosystem, they have developed a taste for each other's flesh, and some days the banks are thick with pink froth. Sometimes the crocodiles are up, sometimes the hippos. It's your standard vicious cycle. There are inhabitants on the other side of the river. Some people say we are the same, those of us on this side of the river and those on the other side, but the people making those statements all reside on this side of the river and tend to be members of fringe groups dedicated to inventing unsettling concepts. My brother is one of these people, and he once spent 2 years building a life-sized mechanical model of a hippopotamus. It was confiscated the moment he walked it out of his domicile. Having never met anyone from the other side, I cannot say I trust any assessment that extends beyond certain observable facts. For instance, I have observed that at night the other side of the river blazes with light. Therefore, I feel confident saying they have electricity. I have also deduced that they like to party, and not only on the weekends. Were there a central authority in charge of both sides of the river, I'd be the first in line to file a complaint about their music and lights, especially the strobes, as my family, due to the orientation of our domicile, is subjected to thunderous distraction at all hours. Many, many years ago, a team on our side built a glider designed to carry a single pilot across the river. On its inaugural flight, the eagles who perch high in the trees around the settlement, far above our sightline, came swooping down and tore the glider to pieces. What was left, little flags of fabric and splintered wood, spiraled into the river where the hippos and crocodiles swarmed over the wreckage. The hippos and crocodiles then fell upon one another, and flesh and bone churned out of the river for days, or so I am told. As a result, airborne conveyances were temporarily abandoned as potential methods of crossing the river. Take a boat, you might say. which would get a laugh on this side of the river as it's sort of a dark cliche that means more or less go fuck yourself. Of course we've tried boats. Throughout the settlement's history, there have been attempts to cross the river in myriad forms of waterborne craft. The most recent, launched when I was a child, was a sloop that cruised at 20 knots in lake tests, fast enough, it was hoped, to outpace the hippos and crocodiles. As a child, I hung great hopes on this sloop. On the appointed day, we gathered at the shore to cheer on the crew. After a communal song, the sloop was released down the slipway and more or less directly into the waiting mouths of the hippos. Then the crocodiles got in on the action. The gracefully curved hull was smashed and the beautiful sails were shredded before they'd even had a chance to fill with wind. My classmate's father perished on the sloop, taken to his watery grave in the gray jaws of a hippo. He was the helmsman. My classmate's father had known nothing about sailing, but when he found out that there was a sloop in development, he learned to sail and competed to be a member of the crew. That's just the sort of guy he was. He beat out 2,000 would-be crewmen. 2,000 people volunteered to be part of a mission that everyone in the settlement knew deep down would end in tragedy. Our history is filled with these stories. I had a normal upbringing. My parents taught me to do my best, treat others fairly, and figure out how to cross the river. My brother, same upbringing, turned out to be something of a comedian philosopher. He likes to ask people what they think would happen if the river froze over. Because of our strict intellectual property laws, my classmate's father was never able to hand down any specialized sailing knowledge to his son. Practically speaking, it wouldn't have been useful since these days sailing is just another hypothesis from the past, but it would have given my classmate something to remember his father by. Naturally, I've tried to pass along to my daughter something that does not violate the intellectual property laws. I'm a playwright, so practically speaking, my specialized knowledge isn't directly applicable to river crossing. But I have taught her that the best time to gaze across the river is dawn, when the air is clearest, when the other siders have finally gone to bed, and the hippos and crocodiles are in repose. My wife and I have made every effort to teach her that a life lived in service of oneself is a life lived in vain. We have made every effort to teach her to do her best, treat others fairly, and figure out how to cross the river. Maybe we should have cooled it a little on the last point. My own father was in marketing, a branch of the civil service. Marketers spend all their time trying to come up with products to lure people from the other side to our side. They innovate ideas and create elaborate advertising campaigns, which is why our riverbank is lined in billboards, all touting extraordinary products the other siders can't live without. However, without metallurgical expertise, or smelting ovens, or electricity, or the internal combustion engine, we're somewhat limited in the temptations we can offer, and to my knowledge, no one from the other side has so much paused to squint at the billboards on our side, not once, which gets at a central problem. I'm pretty sure no one from the other side has ever looked across the river at anything we've got going on over here. It's like they don't even know there's a river to look across. I wouldn't bring this up in mixed company, but sometimes I question whether or not they even know we exist. It's hard to feel anything but the bottomless pit of your stomach when you engage with this idea, which is why I never bring it up. But lately, I've been getting to know the bottomless pit of my stomach pretty well, so why not? We have similar situations here on this side of the river, which is probably why I came up with the idea in the first place. Some people in our settlement, for instance, have almost everything they need, except access to the other side, of course, haha. Live relatively unimperiled lives, yet have no idea that just around the back of their compound walls are people who can barely get it together to submit their monthly crossing idea. Not quite the same thing as being non-existent to the other siders, but the larger point is that we can all get lost in our own heads. It's a regrettable oversight, but it's not a capital offense, and I don't hold it against anyone on the other side if they're too distracted by their party lifestyle to check out our goods and services. What is a capital offense is failing to submit a crossing idea 6 months in a row. Look, it's not easy to come up with a crossing idea. It's time-consuming and it's stressful. If you're blocked, things can get hairy pretty fast. Every so often, a gang selling black market ideas is apprehended, and then we all go to the river to watch the hippos and crocodiles chow down. Which is also what happens if you fail to submit ideas 6 months in a row, which is why the black market exists. You can buy ideas legally, but they're expensive. If you're flush, there are subscription services that provide access to vast halls crammed with fine young minds generating piles of ideas. Every month, you receive a tidy pre-approved idea. If you take into account the legal and governmental infrastructure around the services and throw in the pharmaceutical industry supporting their efforts, about 70% of our economy relies on crossing idea generation. That doesn't even include the government's massive idea operations. It's reasonable to assume that if anyone generated an idea good enough to get us to the other side of the river, our entire economy would collapse. Naturally, there are some subversive elements, yes, my brother again, who suggest that the government scoops up all the good ideas and locks them away, far from human eyes. These are the same people who suggest that the hippos and crocodiles might just be a metaphor for an incurable cultural problem. And who am I to argue? I'm sure in the end there will be statues of my brother all over the settlement. In the meantime, I welcome you to head down to the river on an execution Monday to watch the hippos and crocodiles rip the arms and legs off a family of crossing idea delinquents. Then let's talk metaphors. We look across the river and we see lights. We hear the music. That's our incurable cultural problem right there. We can't stop going to the edge of the bluff and gazing across the river like lovesick teenagers. Anyway, it's the people on the backside of the compound walls who really suffer when it comes to idea generation. Even with one family, one idea, it's no mean feat to forage herbs for pharma from sunup to sundown every day, drag yourself home, get the kids fed, washed and in bed, and then sit by the fire sketching concepts for glider prototypes. Except, of course, because airborne vehicles and catapults and watercraft and zip lines and bridges are all government-funded research programs, they're off limits to civilians. So you can't submit a glider prototype or anything like it. You've really got to innovate. You're crazy if you think I'm going to give you any of my own ideas, but for illustrative purposes, I'll share some that I've heard about over the years. A sand-powered bellows, a carved yew-wood staff for generating sound waves, a lens made of quartz polished to a high gloss. The most famous example, the one everyone hears about in school, the straw. The straw, you say. What kind of idiots, you say. Yet, it was the invention of the straw that led to advances in atmospheric science and physics, which led to the construction of the glider. Who's the idiot now? Yeah, I know. You might still be wondering what any of those other ideas have to do with river crossing, and that's because you're probably thinking big picture. You have to think small. You have to think in increments. The sand-powered bellows, for instance, might be used to keep a warm fire going on a cold winter night, allowing an idea generator who's on the cusp of a crossing breakthrough to work uninterrupted until dawn. You see how it works? Everyone does his or her part. Some of us were lucky enough to inherit ideas from our parents. And if you're me, for instance, you had a burst of creativity in your 20s when you were a loyal customer of the pharma industry and you cranked out 15 or 20 ideas a day for a couple of years. Between my inheritance, my brother not needing his, and the backlog from my 20s, we're pretty much set. My daughter is set. Her kids will be set. Well, she could be. Her kids could be. We're not just trying to figure out how to cross the river that's right in front of us. Expeditions leave the settlement every 2 years. We've been trekking up our side of the river in search of its source for ages, and our terminal outpost is so distant it can't be reached in fewer than 3 lifetimes. No one from our settlement will ever get anywhere near it. What this means is that by the time a dispatch from the terminal outpost arrives back here, the courier is a 3rd or 4th generation explorer who was born on the trail, as were his or her parents, and the dispatch itself is well over a century old. No one in our family has ever been part of an expedition. No one on my wife's side of the family, no one on my side of the family. My wife is a biologist, and I am, as mentioned, a playwright. Historically, everyone's done fine. Everyone's muddled through. My father, as mentioned, a marketer. My mother, a researcher. Everyone respectable. My wife's family, the same. Homebodies all the way back. I don't know what our daughter's thinking. Every 5 years or so, a new dispatch arrives, bound in leather, thousands of pages long, filled with wonders. The entire settlement closes down, and we gather for the reading of the information. We hear about technological and medical advances, feats of engineering that enable lives of unimaginable pleasure, yet it never fails that treachery and war abound. Fratricide, matricide, patricide, sororicide, canicide, ecocide, you name it. You wouldn't believe the shit that goes on at the outposts. Everyone has his or her favorite dispatch, but the hands-down winner-take-all volumes are a string of tomes from the early days, catalogs of catastrophe and mutilation, the result of our not knowing squat about exploring and about not building outposts in the paths of avalanches or on the sides of active volcanoes, or about growing enough crops to fend off starvation, or about proper sewage treatment or inbreeding. Recent dispatches feature less plague and more political betrayal, but on balance, about the same amount of tragedy. There are references to technologies that would easily get us across the river, but because scientific and medical advances are governed by the age-old intellectual property laws, the dispatches provide no guidance that might lead to the manufacture of, say, an internal combustion engine, or tips about the extraction and refinement of petroleum, or say a primer on producing steel, an infinitely hard substance that is nonetheless malleable if one knows its secrets. Wonders abound. But we all know that even if our distant cousins bent the rules and dropped in a page or two of blueprints, the government would just rip them right out of the information and burn them. What we learned a long time ago is that a sudden advance is a dangerous advance. An advance uncoupled from the natural cultural, intellectual, and emotional progression of the settlement leads to mass conflict. A sudden advance is a death sentence. So we do not ask questions about fast attack submarines or suspension bridges. We do not gaze out at the river and wonder how easy it could all be. Every dispatch ends the same way. The search continues. In my darker hours, I find myself wondering if the farthest outposts have forgotten that their mission is to reach the source of the river so that we might safely cross to the other side. Surely, outposts capable of such mighty feats of engineering would have crossed the river hundreds of years ago. Yet the dispatches have never mentioned it. We await good news. There are some people, my brother, yes, of course, who suggest that the dispatches are complete fictions. Some have gone so far as to suggest that they're all produced by an explorer only a few outposts up the river who's been having his fun with us for decades now, just like his parents before him and their parents before them. It's an intriguing idea, and I confess exciting in the way that it might be exciting for a person to walk out to the end of an execution platform and put his toes on the edge and imagine what it would feel like to spread his arms and fall headlong into the mouths of the crocodiles and hippos. My brother has yet another theory, his alone, and it goes like this. Once upon a time, there was nothing but forest on the other side of the river, and we were fine until someone said, "Look at those hippos. Look at those crocodiles. We'd never get across that river. We'd be crazy to try." And so, as though we were children told not to stick our hands in a fire, it began. We dispatched expeditions. And centuries later, the farthest outpost managed to cross the river and began to populate the other side of the river, until finally, after even more centuries had passed, a new outpost was developed directly across from our settlement, and thus we find ourselves today the pathetic losers in a story about success, yearning not to cross for reasons of technological advancement or trade, but because we feel the inexorable magnetic pull of a people divided from itself. My brother trotted out this theory the last time he was over for dinner, and he has not been invited back since. To sign on for an expedition is to abandon your domicile and your parents forever. The way it works is you're evaluated at the age of 13. If you're a favorable candidate, you undergo a series of physical and intellectual tests, and if you do well on those, you're selected for training. Provided you make it through training, which is rigorous and not without the occasional fatality, at the age of 15 or 16, you are deployed. The idea being that you'll make the first outpost by the time you're 18. Approximately every 2 years thereafter, you'll arrive at the next outpost. At outpost 4 or 5, you stop to reproduce. Then proceed at a rate of 1 outpost every 3 years with your children, which you're producing more of along the way. Once your oldest child turns 13, he or she, being a born explorer, forges ahead with the other 13-year-olds in the squad, hitting outposts at a rate of every 2 years. Each of your children will do the same in succession. Given that you will have graduated permanently to the 3-year schedule, you will fall farther and farther behind them. You will never catch up. Just as you left your family back in the settlement, your family leaves you. When I was starting out, I wrote some expedition propaganda. One-acts with perilous escapes, teen dramas that ended with the protagonist choosing the greater good over selfish desires like love or comfort, that sort of thing. All sacrifice and heroism and adventure. It was a simpler time, I suppose. Last spring, my daughter came home from school, making noises about the expeditions. She recounted in great detail the plays she'd seen. I recognized the plot lines, but not much else. I don't know who's writing the propaganda these days, but they're pretty good at it. Maybe it's only because my daughter was so taken with them that I felt the dramas were more complex, targeting a different demographic than in the past. Not to put too fine a point on it, but kids who live in domiciles at the edge of the bluff overlooking the river don't apply to be explorers. If you live on the bluff, you have other options. Traditionally, it's kids from the backside of the compound walls who sign up for the expeditions. Don't get me wrong, standards are high, and an expedition is pitched as an honorable path to take. But everyone understands it's about the compensation. As part of the package, your family gets a 10-year idea dispensation. That's enough to get them off the back wall, to say nothing of keeping your mom and dad and brothers and sisters out of a crocodile's mouth. Talk about heroic. Maybe recruitment numbers are falling off. As far as I know, there's still plenty of smart, physically able kids on the back wall. My daughter is tall and strong, logical to a fault. She would never, ever mistake the river for a metaphor. She abhors obscurity, which makes her the perfect audience for these government-sponsored dramas starring good-looking kids who have to make a tough decision. Join the search for the river's source, or live a regret-filled life in a settlement where, if only a hero had emerged, things in the future could have been different. You see where this is going. My daughter had turned 13 and was suddenly full of tolerance for my jokes, gentle towards me in a way that suggested I'd gone soft in the head, but she wasn't going to let on. In short, she was no longer a child who looked to me for approval, but a person who took my suggestions under advisement. When school ended for the year, she quietly, sidelong, let us know she'd been looking over the application materials. Had I any intention of standing in her way, I should have said so when she first mentioned the application materials, but because I wished to be a father who said that he trusted his daughter to know her own mind, I didn't. She filled out the application. She asked her mother and me to sign. Her mother, unlike me, speaks her mind. "Are you crazy?" she said. My daughter turned to me, not beseechingly as she might once have, but with a calm look of inquiry, as if to say, "And what do you think, young man?" My wife looked at me too, furious that she had to look at me. "Well," I said. My wife expelled a sigh that sounded a bit like a moan, which caused my daughter's placid facade to crack just for a moment. They are confidants and competitors, those two, and I'm quite sure that if one cuts her finger, the other, who might be on the other side of the settlement, flinches. I attempted to placate them both, with predictable results. Eventually, they set up in a corner of our domicile, arranged so closely to each other that they might have been a pair of foxes in their den, and they talked through the night. When I got up the next morning, they had reached an agreement. Our daughter was asleep in her bed. My wife had signed her name. "This is a terrible, terrible idea," my wife said to me. "I feel like I'm being dangled over the river." "Why did you sign then?" I said. "What choice do I have?" she said. "She'll hate me if I say no, and I can't bear that because I am a small, insecure crumb of a person who cannot live without her love." I was ashamed. She had spoken a truth that I knew was meant for me too. My wife at least had the courage to identify herself. As for me, I am a crumb and a coward. At times like these, I wonder how the other-siders approach problems of this scale, problems that arise because of insurmountable personal failings. What would it mean to a father on the other side to hear that his daughter wanted to volunteer to become a pack mule/baby machine to throw away a perfectly good future? Do they even have these problems over there, or do they just party all the time and eat pharmaceuticals and take everything as it comes? Sometimes I wish I could party all the time. After our daughter submitted her application, my wife and I spoke about her as though she were someone else's child. That is, we participated in a shared delusion that her desire to become an explorer was a phase, a normal function of her arrival at the doorstep of adulthood, and that we'd done no harm in allowing her to engage in this act of independence. In fact, we talked about it as though we'd behaved in an enlightened fashion. A butterfly emerged from its chrysalis does not instantly take flight. First, it must open its wing to the sun so that they might dry. "Look at how well we've handled our butterfly," we said. "Bravo for us." Bravo. Yay for stupidity. Hurrah for morons. Our daughter was selected for in-person evaluation and was given a week to respond. "So," I said to my daughter, doing my best impression of an impartial, if curious, third party. I was still participating in the delusion. My daughter did not answer immediately. She held the evaluation information, time, date, location, in her hands, looking down at it as if weighing her options. She'd always done the right thing in the past, and I was counting on her to do the right thing again. Doing the right thing meant carefully considering her mother's and my wishes, whether spoken or not, and submitting. There had never been an option before, not an actual option. Well, guess what? I was about to learn why my daughter was a top recruit. She is neither defiant nor sarcastic. Beyond her physical attributes, she bears few of the traits one might expect to find in a 13-year-old. She is definitive, able to read the moods of those around her, confident but not arrogant, thoughtful but firm, invaluable characteristics, I'm told, out on the trail. And she is resolute. In the late summer, the crocodiles mate. For some reason, perhaps jealousy, this agitates the hippos. And for a few weeks, it's crazy town down at the river. They destroy everything, the billboards, the execution platforms, whatever abandoned crossing experiments might be lying around. Getting a seat in a tree stand isn't cheap, but I anteed up and took my daughter. We hadn't been since she was little, a visit that had ended early when she insisted on leaving after a band of hippos tossed a crocodile, 20 feet of thrashing prehistoric monstrosity, out of the water and into the trunk of our tree, which shuddered to its highest branches, setting a flock of eagles screamingly aflight and frightening her so profoundly that she had nightmares for months. Cruel, but I thought, I'd give her another dose of the primal mode to shock her back to her senses. It was quiet when we sat down, but things got started soon enough. A juvenile hippo had drifted away from the bloat to investigate a crocodile nest and was being stalked by 3 crocodiles. They slid like knives through the water, nothing more than 3 pairs of eyeballs, and surrounded the hippo. Their jaws broke the surface. They snapped at the hippo until it was fatigued. Then they got serious. And one clamped his jaws around the hippo's head and went into the death spin. The other spectators were cheering and booing. No one really knows who to root for at these things. The rest of the hippos, alerted to trouble, began their charge, their awful mouths gaping, and the ensuing carnage was so bloody I had to look away from time to time. I could not help but think of what dangers awaited my daughter on the trail. Meanwhile, farther down the river, a different bloat had attacked a pair of crocodiles locked in the mating pose. And then a third attack broke out along the stretch of bank directly below us. My daughter was leaning forward with her hands on the rail, enraptured. Another thing that troubles me about the other side are their entertainments so awesome that they can't be bothered to come to the river at mating season to watch. Perhaps it's nothing more than a fundamental difference in what they find entertaining versus what we find entertaining, but I get a little hollow when I ponder the possibility of a whole settlement of people who can't even take the slightest interest in mating season. My daughter and I had left the tree stand and were taking a circuitous route to the domicile along the tranquil edge of the settlement when she said, "Do you still think it's a phase?" She elbowed me in the ribs. I was glad the frogs were making such a racket because I didn't want her to hear my heart cracking, which sounded like me getting ready to vomit. I'm not a person who believes in moments that change everything, but the realization that something has already changed can come on you in a flash, that's for sure. We'd never babied her. On the contrary, we'd had high, possibly excessive expectations of her, but I didn't see this one coming. She'd outgrown us well ahead of schedule. That night, while my daughter was in her room alternating between push-ups and advanced orienteering problems, my wife asked me what we were going to do. "I don't know. We're in real trouble here," I said. "What's the worst that can happen if we shut it down?" my wife said. "She's angry for a couple of weeks and then everything goes back to normal, right?" Sorry. My wife had taken another dose of delusional thinking. I didn't want to say what we both knew, that if we told our daughter no, if we told her that under no circumstances would we allow her to continue with this expedition nonsense, we'd lose her. Not for a week or two, but forever. We might have her body, her voice, her physical person there in the domicile with us, but we'd have lost her. The person our daughter had become would not be bent to our will. We were going to lose her, absolutely. The only question was how we would lose her. My wife said, if we let her go without a fight, we might as well tell her we don't love her. We have to show her that we want her here because we love her. Which will not change her mind, I said. It will make her feel terrible, but it will not change her mind. We have to do something, my wife said. We sat our daughter down. I told her we wanted to talk about life choices. "He means we want to talk about the expedition," my wife said. "Okay," our daughter said. She leaned back and crossed her fingers over her stomach and tilted her head to the side and smiled peaceably. She looked like a judge about to hand down a ruling that we would eventually come to understand to be in our best interest. "I think we'd like to hear your reasoning," I said. "Tell us about your motivations." "Okay," she said, beaming like a winner, like she was sitting before the assessment panel at the exploration ministry. "So," my wife said. "Oh, you know," my daughter said. She looked up, she tapped her chin, she pursed her lips, then she said, "I guess it's complicated." She shrugged. "Most things are," my wife said. "I guess I don't really know," my daughter ventured. "You don't know?" my wife said, her voice just this side of combustion. "You must have given it some thought." "I guess so," our daughter said. I was struck by the shift in her attitude. I didn't quite understand where the self-assured girl who'd elbowed me in the ribs had gone. "Is this a joke?" my wife said. Her daughter's eyes narrowed. "No, it's not a joke," she said. "Do you understand that we're concerned for your personal safety?" I said. "Mm-hmm," our daughter said. "And do you know what's out there?" I said. "You've heard what happens on the expeditions? You've listened to the dispatches?" "I do. I have." "We understand," my wife said. "We understand that this is not the most exciting place to grow up. We understand that you're ambitious, but there are ways to live an exciting life, all in due time." "I'm not looking for excitement," our daughter said. "Then why in the world would you leave this for that?" my wife said. Our daughter looked away from us. She looked down. For a long time she didn't speak, and when she did, she said, "I think there might be something different out there is all. I mean, this is great. I love her domicile and everything, but what?" I said. Now I was on the verge of combusting. "Don't take this the wrong way," she said. "Promise you won't take this the wrong way." She looked at us. I shook my head in disbelief. My wife's hands were out before her in a plaintive gesture I'd never before seen her make. It's not you specifically, our daughter said. It's long term. It's the settlement. It's all of it. The settlement and the unique ecosystem and the other side. Don't you listen to the dispatches? Don't you want to know how they're doing it? Don't you want to live a more advanced life? The resonant echoes of propaganda. What is propaganda anyway, but a candle held up to beliefs we already suspect to be true? I had no idea what to say, so I said the most outrageous thing I could think of. The dispatches are fairy tales, I said. They are nothing more than fictions propagated by a band of settlers at an outpost just a few years from here, and for precisely the reason that there's nothing out there, no engines, no airplanes, no penicillin, the government allows the dispatches to keep flowing in. It's all about controlling the populace. Oh, Dad, she said. You won't even make it a quarter of the way, my wife said. You'll never even get close to seeing any of the advances. I know that, our daughter said. So what are you thinking, my wife said. This makes no sense. My children's children, our daughter sighed. We can't stay here forever. We have to move forward. Well, if the advances are real, why haven't they sent someone back for us in an airship? Explain that, my wife said. Our daughter looked at us as if we were the saddest, dumbest creatures in the whole world. They've forgotten about us, she said. Isn't that obvious? We're the fairy tales. Why would you send an airship back for a myth? My brother lives in a small domicile on the forest side of the settlement. He passes whole weeks without seeing the river. Though he lives modestly, he is insanely rich due to an idea he came up with while working at a research lab co-funded by Big Pharma and Settlement Advancement. His idea was so good that they told him to go back to his domicile and put his feet up for the rest of his life. He hasn't had to submit an idea in 25 years. Naturally, I do not know what his idea was, and my brother alternately claims to have forgotten or to have never known in the first place. He claims that, like everyone else at his research facility, he submitted multiple ideas a day. Then one afternoon, he received a document informing him that he no longer needed to introduce new ideas to the pipeline, ever. I don't know what the truth is. Seems to me they'd want to hold on to a guy with good ideas and see if he could come up with anything else, but what do I know? My brother likes to say, if it was such a great idea, what are we still doing here? Normally, I would not have presented a personal problem to my brother, but in this case, I was desperate, and I felt he might be able to enlighten me as to my daughter's views on life in the settlement, as I'd often heard him sound familiar notes. I sat on his dusty floor, my brother has almost no furniture, and explained what was happening. He listened attentively, occasionally rubbing his beard and staring at a point on the wall, as he's always done when trying to puzzle out some seemingly intractable problem. When I got to the part where she said we couldn't stay in the settlement forever, he laughed. What's funny, I said. She's no dummy, he said. On the surface, I can't disagree with that assessment, I said. She knows the score all right, he said. How so? Still spending a lot of time looking at the river, do you? Occupational hazard, I said. Sure, he said. It's just right there, I said. How do you not look at it, even if you don't want to, I said. My brother has always done this to me. He's the smart one, and he taunts me with questions he already knows the answer to. So what, I said. So I look at the river. Everyone does. I don't, he said. Yes, you do. I close my eyes when I'm near it. No, you don't, I said. I do, he said. I guess some of us don't have that luxury, I said. Oh, my brother said, but we all do. It's the one luxury we all share. That's juvenile, I said. The river exists whether you look at it or not. Absolutely correct, he said. I'm not denying the river's existence, but I'm denying my eyes the chance to confirm its existence. You're ridiculous. Do you ever wonder, my brother said, if the river's a circle? No, I said. What if it's not a river but a moat? And one day, all of the expeditions will walk back into the settlement from the south side, and then what? I shrugged. Ever wonder why we don't just dig a tunnel under the river? Can you cut it out with the philosophy? I said. Let me show you something, he said. He got up and walked through the door to his workshop. Come on, he called. I'm coming, I said, though at the time I had no interest in anything he could possibly have shown me. Look at this, he said when I entered the workshop, which was almost as big as my entire domicile. He pulled a sheet off to reveal, you guessed it, another of his life-size mechanical hippos. What's with you, I said. It's a good idea, he said. You know why they took the first one? Because they knew it was a good idea, and it works. What do you mean it works, I said. It's a theoretically sound idea, my brother said. If a person were to conceal himself inside my machine and remain among the hippos, he could move about the river at will. I ran my hand over the hippo's rough skin. He textured and colored it perfectly. It was hideously lifelike, from the hairs on its snout to the washed pink around the ears. Only the eyes, which were empty hollows, gave it away. There was some sort of fan mechanism beneath its tail. Propulsion, he said. You want to get inside and see how it works, he said. Nope, I said, no way. Suit yourself, he said. Say you get it down to the river, I said. What about the crocodiles? There's risk in every venture, he said. Well, it's very nice, I said. I'm sure you'll be executed for building it. Probably, my brother said. So, I said. I don't really know your daughter, my brother said. I feel like I don't either, not lately, I said. You could bring her around once in a while. You could swing by our side of the settlement, I said. My brother said. So, any thoughts? Anything, I said. Well, my brother said, all things being equal, sounds like she's no more a fan of the river than I am. She's not walking around with her eyes closed, if that's what you mean, I said. Are you sure? My brother said. I had to think about it. What did I really know about what she did and didn't do? I don't really close my eyes, my brother said. I don't want to fall in. What a way to go. But I could. I could if I wanted to, and I suspect she could too. Right, I said. I don't know what to tell you, he said. Anything that helps you hurts her, and I'm not in that line of business. Neither am I said. There's no solution. There's a solution, my brother said. It's just not the one you want. That's what I meant, I said. Sure, he said. When I got back to our domicile, the other side of the river was pumping. They had the rainbow strobes on, washing the low clouds in bursts of color. The mist hanging over the water was throbbing to the beat. Inside, my daughter was sitting at the table, her face in her hands. Her forearms had become sinewy from all the grappling training she'd been doing, and her veins stood out like threads against the braids of muscle. She was sobbing. My wife was sitting at the table, but not next to my daughter, at a small distance, and she looked grim. Her arms were crossed. They were the arms of my wife. They had not changed. They were recognizable, for which I was glad. What happened? I said. My daughter shook her head. Her ponytail whipped back and forth. Her sobbing changed slightly to accommodate her attempt to communicate without abating. I looked to my wife and made a face. I'm not supposed to speak, she said. Shut up, my daughter said. Hey, I said, we don't talk to each other that way. Then tell him, my daughter said. Tell him what you did. My wife shrugged and said, I went over to the Commission for Expeditions and inquired about research slots. Let me explain. Some expeditions have an advisor attached, someone from a scientific or technical field. When a research slot is vacated at an outpost, that is, when someone dies, word comes back with the dispatch. And in the case of an outpost vacancy that's within striking distance, the settlement sends someone to fill the post. Or in the case of an outpost that's too far to reach, an advisor who can train an explorer while they're on the trail. In that case, the advisor will die somewhere out on the trail, but the young, freshly trained advisor will carry on to the outpost to fill the vacancy. My wife, who's a botanist of some renown, finished her field work long before our daughter was born. There was no reason for her to volunteer for an expedition. She could not accompany our daughter due to very clear and well-known rules that prohibit family members from joining the same expedition. What she'd done was nothing more than an act of cruelty. She was an injured animal attacking because she was in pain. If she's going, my wife said, jerking her thumb at our daughter, I'm going. My daughter's sobbing became a wail. Who can explain why people do what they do? I have known my wife for half my life. We are not strangers to each other. We do not harbor secrets from each other. She is a mystery to me. Later, long after our daughter had refused dinner, after she had refused consolation, after she had shut herself away in her room, her sobbing relented. It was the middle of the night. The music from the other side of the river, even through our soundproofed walls and windows, was thumping away. I wonder if the party animals over there ever skip a shindig due to problems back at the domicile. I wonder if they ever tone down the light show in deference for those who might be trying to sort something out. In my experience, the human condition, the simple act of being, is a license to create problems of increasing complexity, even as we struggle to solve them, until eventually we are trapped by our own decisions, unable to escape from the maze we've built around ourselves. They must be subject to the human condition on the other side too, so they must deal with hairy problems. What I wouldn't give to know how they'd handle this one. Are you bluffing? I said to my wife. We were in bed and she was reading. She responded without looking up from her text. Nope, she said. I don't understand, I said. I don't either, she said, but someone has to do something. This doesn't solve anything, I said. I disagree, she said. I don't feel like I'm a little rabbit being dangled over a float of crocodiles anymore. That's me, I said. That would be me now. Well, she said. Yeah, well, I said. I fell asleep and had a dream, a recurring dream in which I was being pursued by the authorities. I was running through the settlement, and though everyone wished to help me, they were afraid to do so. An old couple, however, opened their door and I stole inside their domicile. Then, it was years later. I had a seat in the front row at a play, not unlike the ones I write for production here in the settlement. I was wearing fine clothes. The authorities who pursued me were no longer in power. On stage, the old man and woman were standing outside their domicile being questioned by the authorities. They were skilled liars, but not so skilled that the authorities were fooled, and they vowed to return. I was troubled by the paradox of the play, as in Act 3, I was apprehended by the authorities, yet there I sat in the audience, watching my own capture. I was caught because when the authorities returned, I could not resist peeking through the curtain to watch the interrogation. It was my eye, googling around in the corner of the window, that betrayed my subterfuge. I have this dream in times of trouble, and I always wake with the strange feeling of peace. Not the cold terror one might expect, as though two parts of myself have been rejoined, though I cannot understand why, as I have always lived in this settlement and have never been anything but a law-abiding citizen. I knew you'd be back, my brother said. It was deep in the night, and I had risen from the dream and walked directly to his domicile through the deserted settlement, dark except for the ambient light from across the river. Well, I said. My brother was wearing a heavy apron and was carrying a mallet and a chisel and was covered in wood chips. Do you ever sleep? I said. Only when I'm not awake, he said. So, I said. Domestic tribulations, he said. I told him my wife's plan. Yow, he said. So? I looked past him to the workshop door. So, I said. Yeah, he said, come on. I followed him back into his workshop. There was an old tree trunk in the corner, stripped of its bark, minor signs of chiseling here and there. What's that? I said. Nothing yet, he said. I blinked at him. I just started it today, he said. It's a sculpture. I walked over to the mechanical hippo and touched the sheet. Yeah, go ahead, he said. I pulled it off. Hatches on top, he said, sliding me a stepladder with his foot. It's pretty self-explanatory, he said. Push the things on the floor to move the legs, turn the crank for the propulsion system, pull the sticks to turn. The rope in the back twitches the tail. Use the straw to breathe if the air gets stale. Inside, the hippo smelled like pig fat and compost. I closed the hatch and my brother played a little ditty on the rump. Send a dispatch when you get there, he said through the ear mesh. He pushed open the workshop's big roller door. It's not hard to maneuver. My brother is a genius of mechanical advantage, and walking through the settlement was no harder than climbing a gentle hill. His first hippo had been confiscated because, although he'd walked it out of his domicile in the dead of the night, it had made a terrible racket and woken up the whole neighborhood. This new one is silent, but for its four-toed feet, which make slapping sounds on some of the harder packed roads leading to the river. By the time I got there, I was pretty sure I had the hang of it. Even clearing the bluff and the sloped bank wasn't so bad. The partying had ended on the other side, but there was enough light to see where the hippos were clustered. I stopped at the water's edge to yank the rope for verisimilitude's sake, and then I was off. The chassis has excellent buoyancy, and the propulsion system seems to be working just fine. I checked the right eye hole. Some hippos are drifting toward me. Their eyes glisten in the light from the other side. One opens its mouth lazily, not in a threatening fashion, and it closes just as slowly. Soon they are close enough that I can see their eyelashes. They bump my craft, and the rough friction of our skin sliding against each other vibrates up through the steering sticks, but I remain on course. The bloat is sounding, their underwater calls booming through the shell and echoing around the spacious interior. They're huffing and grunting all around me. I can't concern myself with whether they can see me peering out at them from the hollow innards or whether they are dismayed by my silent progress. I must keep my nose pointed at the other side and continue to turn the crank. My daughter is about to vanish into the wilderness with my wife in tow. Someone has to put an end to this madness. That's the end. Should we do some questions or, yeah? Anything, everything? I'm all yours.
Can you tell us how you composed that?
On a stone tablet using a mallet and a. So my daughter wanted to join an expedition, which means she wanted to go away to school. And she had said for years that she didn't want to go away to school, to boarding school. And then when the time came, she decided she wanted to go. And around the same time, I was sitting on the sofa one day with my wife, and we were talking about where fiction comes from in a very bare bones sense. What do you need to make a story? And I said, all you need is a river and somebody who wants to get across it and can't make it. And I thought, hey, wow, that's a nice idea. And I started working on it, and then all of this stuff with my daughter started to flow in. And I thought, okay, maybe this is worth pursuing. So that's where it came from.
And that's when you woke up.
Yeah. Well, it was initially a much more, the dream was a much bigger part of it, and it had more touch points in authoritarian systems, but I thought that's not very honest of me. I don't live in an authoritarian system, so I should just keep it right here. Yeah.
How do you know it's the right time to end a story? Like with that one, I feel like I struggle with knowing whether or not to wrap up all the loose ends or like kind of leave it open-ending. Like how do you know it's the right time to just leave it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I feel this story, might have ended once before it ended. I look at short stories like The Complications of a Watch. In a really technical sense, everything has to be packed in. Everything is intrinsic to everything else that's happening. This is character, narrative, story, language, voice, it all, it's all like going like this and twisting and pulling against every other element of the story. And my experience is that if I focus on making sure that all the gears are meshing properly, an ending presents itself. And I like sustained notes at the end of a story too, which makes some people completely crazy, I realize, but I like the idea of trying to give an ending a bit of a downhill push so that whoever's reading it can then go, oh, and you think about it a little bit. It's not the guillotine, it's over. Sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want a flat, happy ending. But that's not really what I'm after. And that's a really amorphous answer because endings are really hard. Read Frank Kermode on endings, and maybe that will get us a little closer to it. I don't mean right now. I don't mean read Frank Kermode right now. It's like you don't have to.
Would you talk about the challenges of the first-person narration through that story?
How much time you got? Yeah, I have gotten, as I've written more and more stories, I have gotten more interested in trying to write engaging voices that I think having a self-reflexive, self-evaluative voice is, I don't mean that it's a trick when I say this, but it draws a reader in. And the reason I want to draw a reader in is to make some kind of connection. Ideally, there's a communion going on between the story and the reader that I don't know anything about. It's 50% reader, 50% me, and I put it on the page and hope it works. And I feel like, who wants to read a story about a kid leaving home? Boo-hoo. So in this, I tried very hard to keep it light and a little bit sardonic. And the challenge always is how do you keep it engaging and keep it real at the same time? And I mean, God help me if I know how you're supposed to do that. I mean, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I think, George Saunders is a master of that kind of voice that is both very serious and also very frank. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested in how Murakami, in the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, has that voice. It's like, come on in. Completely insane things are about to happen, but you're going to stay with me because I'm a friendly person. You're a friendly person. That voice has been very difficult for me because I have always written from rage. And I have been told this by other people, and I've stopped disagreeing with them. But the enraged voice is not always the most engaging voice. So for me, that's the challenge in getting to this first-person narrator, is to try to control the rage in a way. Yes, sir.
This plays off of really the same things, but why a playwright?
That's a good question. Why not? Because a playwright is a creator of fictions, and this story is intentionally playing with the idea of fact fiction, not necessarily conspiracy, but I'm interested in how conspiracy works, conspiracy theories especially, that they work basically as a really good role-playing game which is just a really good piece of fiction. And it seemed to me correct that, there's always a question, I don't know how many of you write, but there's always this question of, if you have a first-person narrator, what does the narrator reasonably know that that narrator can then pass on to the reader? If you're going to write a story about an airplane, it's different if the narrator is a flight attendant or a pilot. The built-in information that you're able to give. And I thought, here's a society that I'm not entirely sure I've got a handle on myself. They don't have all this stuff, but they're aware of it. Who could parse that? A poet? A fiction writer seems a little like too cute. It's like a playwright, I think. And there's all this subterranean stuff going on. I was reading this and I realized there's somebody in this room who has a beard and looks off in the distance as he touches his beard and thinks about ideas. I'm like, oh my God, is that him? Is that the brother? Could be. Could be. I'm deeply, deeply interested in how we create fiction by dipping this ladle into the dark river within us without disturbing the river and without looking at what's in the ladle and getting it onto the page without destroying it or trying to control it, which leads to a lot of open-ended answers to good questions, unfortunately. But it's not that I don't want to know, it's that some things I just do by feel. So it's a good question, though. Yeah, I've got one back here.
Often when I try and write a really serious story, it ends up becoming a comedy kind of by accident.
That's great.
Or just it does. So I was wondering, how do you decide when is a story going to have a sense of humor, and how do you edit for when that's appropriate or not appropriate?
That's such a good question. I'm trying to figure it out too. I think the answer is you don't. You don't figure it out. You don't try to control it. You follow it, if that makes sense. I don't know. Tobias Wolff is someone I've been reading my whole life, and only in the last 15 years or so has his stuff started getting really funny to me. And I realized that there is a dramatic irony that is at play a lot that I didn't get before. And I think that humor, they say, is, the exposure of the truth that we all know to be true, but we prefer not to acknowledge. And that's what short fiction, that's what fiction is supposed to do. It's the same ground we're treading on. And I think Raymond Carver also is someone who you look at as being like very serious and hilarious. There's really, a lot of it has to do with like, and I'm talking about from the reading side, but like allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to be like, that's actually really funny. Like, it's literature. It is, and literature is hilarious. And the reason that it's hilarious is because something resonates within you that you know to be true, and that's why you laugh. This gentleman here years ago told me that laughter was the way that we show our teeth, because in a primal sense, we are afraid of the joke. So we flash our fangs, and that's what laughter is. I think that's really interesting. I think there's some truth to that. There's fear. It's a natural reaction. And so these things that you're talking about, that's good. That's good friction to have. If these two things are, and you can't figure out which it is, don't figure it out. Just go with it. Just go. Because it will, anything that we really try to control and muscle into a corner usually reads that way. It gets really clunky and prescriptive looking. Did you, yeah.
Jack, this is a question about the narrator of the story as compared to the narrator of the Blizzard Party. And that is, I would say, if I were ranking the intelligence of the characters of the story, the narrator, say there are 5, the narrator might be 2 or 3 in intelligence versus the hyper awareness, knowingness, superhuman wisdom, referentiality of the narrator of the Blizzard Party. Can you talk a little bit about those sort of different voices, eyes, brains to write through.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the short answer is because that's what I needed in the Blizzard Party, which started out as a gigantic conspiracy theory, speaking of, about a woman's life in a way. And I needed a narrator who was smart enough to wrap her arms around all of it, someone who was smarter than me, for sure. And sometimes it's just not necessary. And it's funny, again, Tobias Wolff said, you know, you can't write a character who's smarter than you are. I think you can. I don't know if you can write a character who's more insightful than you are. But, you know, they evolve to meet the requirements of the emotional resonance of the story. I mean, that's, for me, the heart of the ball of wax is the heart, and what do I need to convey this sense? It's a reaction. We were talking about this a little in class this morning. It's, for me, there's a question at the middle of every story, and it's an unanswerable question, and I go in knowing that, but I'm still going to poke at it, and what equipment do I need to convey that outward to the world for some idea that we can share this. And then there's a whole side of it where they just come to you. The voices just come as needed. And that was, I spent a long time with Hazel Saltwater, who's the narrator of the novel. And she grew and transformed, and yeah, she wrote herself in a lot of ways. I hate hearing stuff like that. It's like, but after you work on something for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, the characters do have their own respiration systems sometimes. Anybody else? Yeah.
So, as we're entering the phase of editing our pieces, I was just really curious about your process of editing. When do you know that it's done? When do you stop? When do you step away? Yeah, just what is that like?
When there's a thing on the calendar that says deadline. Well, and this is the other thing. I mean, like with fiction, nobody cares. Nobody cares whether you finish it, right? You can send it out tomorrow, or you can send it out in 10 years, and nobody's going to be knocking on your door. I don't mean to speak for you. Maybe you, not me. No one's like calling me saying, "Hey, where's the next story?" I tend, with fiction, I will hold on to a thing until I cannot deal with it anymore. It's very much like I get sick of it. I think I also have in the past gone completely all the way around the barn, where I will revise something so many times that it basically winds up being back in its original shape. That's a good sign you're done. It's like, okay, what are we going to do here? Like, there's nothing left to do. You've done everything. None of the rest of this stuff worked. You got it right the first time. What did you just spend 3 years doing? That's how it works sometimes. Yeah, it's really difficult. I think it's also, this is where your readers come in, your friends, your writer friends. You send them work, they say yes, 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 no, not this, do that. It comes back, it breathes a little fresh air into it, and the thing comes back alive, and you can work on it some more. But sometimes, you've got to get a second set of eyes, or the more. It's interesting. I think Philip Roth, at the end of his life, was sending his manuscripts out to about 100 people. And, that's like doing a marketing survey almost, because even if everybody doesn't have the same problem with some chapter, if everybody's pointing at the same chapter, something's going on. And so to focus on that in revision. But as for when I'm done, it's what I can't put up with anymore. I'm done dealing with it, and I want it out of the house. Yeah.
Has that ever happened in the middle of writing something? Like you're not towards you know it's not finished, but you're done. And like what did
Sure.
you do? Did you keep going, or has there been projects where you just
I have things that I've abandoned. There's a long a folder on my machine that has abandoned stories in it, and it's almost as long as the brilliant lines that I've cut out of everything else that I've written that I couldn't actually throw away because I'll use them again someday. Oh my God, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of words, and you never look at them again. But you can't actually get rid of them. So, but yeah, it happens less often now because I think I know what I'm interested in, and I know before I start whether or not something's got enough gas. It's like, can I actually do enough with this premise or this idea or this feeling? Can I manipulate and live with it long enough to turn it into an actual story? And that's just failing 100 times to finish other things and kind of knowing, all right, that ain't gonna work, that will. But sure, yeah, I mean, that's part of it. Lots of abandonment. Yes, sir?
Share with us your thought process on domicile.
Oh,
On there.
good.
Dozen other words you could have
Yeah,
alternated and
yeah.
seemed a little bit distracting, but it also said there's something here he's trying to say with that one word
Mhm.
over and over.
I wanted to, it's a great question. I used it explicitly to signal that there was something slightly off here. That this was not my house down the street. I'm pretty sure, speaking of readers, for 20 some odd years, novelist Antoine Wilson and I have traded work back and forth. And I had abode in there 15 times. And he said, oh, no. And then I said, how about domicile? And he said, no, not that one either. And I said, well, I don't care. I'm out of ideas. I've only got 2 and I'm done and I got better things to do. So that's how domicile happened. But it could have been worse. It could have been abode. She was right. He was right. That wasn't great. House. But house doesn't communicate the fact that we are not living in this story is not set in our present world. This is in the future. I think fast attack submarines means that it's set in the future because they get the information about the fast attack submarines, but they can't use it. I think this is in the future, and it's just slightly left of reality. That's left, not a math major or something.
So it's creative, not oversight.
It's not an oversight. No, I mean, I hope there's nothing that's an oversight in here. That's every word has been worried to death usually by the time I'm done, which is why I get sick of them. Yeah.
My friend Alice and I right here, we were talking just now. Why do your characters not have names? Is there like a reasoning for that?
Yeah. It's the atmospherics of this strange place that I was trying to create without completely trying to paint the picture in the most obvious sketchbook way. I just wanted to make things a little bit off. And there's probably also a little disassociation there. I don't want to give the daughter a name because this story is very close to my emotional experience, which, by the way, turned out great. Like I'm happy where she is, but she is resolute and logical and all of these things and strong. And it's a good question because there's that thing again, that dark river, like. Let's not mess with it too much. I'm not sure I actually ever thought about it, which is probably telling. Anybody else?
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
There are copies of Jack's books for sale right outside the auditorium here. I bet you're going to sign them.
I will, for a modest fee. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. That was really great.
Oh, of course.
Appreciate that.
Like brochure and space for Abbott's.
Yeah. Hi.
Lena, Sherry, from the union, the
Yes.
college union.
I recognize you
Do you?
even behind
With
your
the
mask.
mask?
How are you?
I'm
good.
good.
It's
I'm
so
good.
great to
I
see
gotta
you.
show
Oh my God.
you.
So,
How are you doing?
I
Look,
want-
you're doing great. I
oh,
mean,
thanks.
That's all, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
I remember we did a reading once and only 2 people showed up.
Who was that? I was
It-
trying to remember who we brought.
It was a
I
guy,
don't
it
know
was,
who
no, it was a poet named Dino Tracus who taught at Wofford.
Yeah.
And the only people who came were people who'd studied with him at governor's school. It was
Really?
me and